The young and the restless spoilers locked in a claustrophobic space with nothing but the echoes of their own voices and the bitter taste of despair. Phyllis and Sharon could no longer ignore the oppressive reality of their captivity. Every passing moment in that grim confinement felt like an eternity, and the desire to escape grew with each heartbeat. Their whispered conspiracies in the dim light of their confinement were filled with anger and frustration, as they recounted every second of the relentless hours they'd been forced to endure. Both women, hardened by life's many betrayals and disappointments, shared a single, unyielding goal: freedom. Yet, as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones, a new question gnawed at Phyllis's mind. "Who is behind this nightmare?" she demanded, her voice rising in fury. She was not content to be a passive victim. Her temper was a volatile mix of despair and a thirst for vengeance. "I swear, I will kill whoever dares to do this to us," she roared, her declaration echoing against the cold, unforgiving walls. But the situation was far from straightforward. The captor had orchestrated this lethal game with meticulous precision, or so he had hoped. In his world, every word was carefully modulated by a sophisticated voice distortion software designed to keep his true identity hidden. However, fate had a cruel sense of irony. In a critical moment of tension, when Phyllis's enraged tirade reached its peak, a malfunction occurred. The software stuttered, faltered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it revealed the true timbre of the kidnapper's voice. That moment of technological failure was all it took. With unfiltered clarity, the real voice emerged from the speakers, resonating throughout the room. "Nick," Phyllis screamed, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and incredulity. "Nick, you're the kidnapper. Come out here now." The sound of her accusation sliced through the charged atmosphere like a knife. Sharon's eyes, equally filled with shock and fury, met Phyllis's, and in that instant, the facade of anonymity crumbled away, leaving only the raw truth behind their tormentor. Nick, who had meticulously concealed his identity and manipulated every twist and turn of this deadly game, found himself caught in the act. His heart pounded in his chest as the magnitude of his mistake dawned on him. For him, this was an unforeseen disaster, a moment when the calculated veneer of control dissolved into chaos. The revelation was both terrifying and humbling. In the labyrinth of his own making, Nick had never expected that a mere glitch would become his undoing. Fury erupted in both Phyllis and Sharon. Their anger was palpable, fueled not only by the betrayal of being ensnared in another of Nick's dangerous schemes, but also by the personal indignity of being manipulated once more. "How could you do this to us?" Sharon demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "You put us in this deadly game and made us suffer, just for your twisted amusement." The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable, a raw, unfiltered expression of betrayal that cut deep into the fabric of the situation. Nick, realizing the precariousness of his position, tried to regain control. "Listen to me," he pleaded, his voice shaking slightly as he attempted to maintain the upper hand. "This isn't about hate. I need you to unite, to come together in the face of this adversity. There's more at stake than personal grievances. We have to work together if we want any chance of escaping this nightmare." His words, intended to sow the seeds of cooperation, were met with scorn and incredulity by both women. The trust he once wielded with cold precision was now irrevocably shattered by his own carelessness. Phyllis, still seething with the desire for retribution, clenched her fists. "Do you really think we can forgive you so easily? You've turned our lives into a living hell, and now you expect us to just stand down and unite like some kind of team?" Her voice was heavy with the weight of accumulated pain and disillusionment. Every moment of their captivity had eroded their hope, leaving behind a raw bitterness that no apology could mend. For Nick, this confrontation was a turning point. The revelation of his identity had disrupted the delicate balance of power he had so carefully constructed. He had always believed that his ultimate goal was to force his captives into unity, to break down the walls of hatred and mistrust that separated them, all under the guise of a twisted form of redemption. Now, faced with the full force of their anger, he was forced to confront the reality that perhaps he had crossed a line from which there was no return. Maybe I made a mistake, Nick admitted, his voice laced with regret. I never intended for it to go this far. I thought that by forcing you to come together, I could show you a different way, a way to survive, to be free from all this misery. But clearly, I misjudged everything. His words hung in the air, a fragile attempt at reconciliation that fell on deaf ears. The notion of forgiveness, especially in a situation where lives were being toyed with like pawns on a chessboard, seemed both implausible and unattainable. In the silence that followed, the room became a crucible of conflicting emotions. Phyllis's eyes burned with the desire for vengeance, a need to punish Nick for his reckless disregard for their well-being. Sharon, too, struggled with her own turbulent feelings, a blend of anger, hurt, and a desperate longing for the days when she believed that there might be some semblance of normalcy, even if it was a fragile illusion. For both, the dream of escape was overshadowed by the bitter truth that the man behind their suffering was still among them, unrepentant and determined to see his plan through. As the tension reached its peak, Nick stood silently, a solitary figure caught between the roles of mastermind and victim. His error had not only exposed him but had also ignited a flame of resentment that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The idea of forgiveness, once a distant hope in his mind, now seemed like an unattainable fantasy. How could they possibly forgive someone who had orchestrated such terror, who had manipulated their very emotions for his own deranged amusement? The questions hung in the air. Would Nick ever come forward and admit his wrongdoing entirely? Did he truly seek forgiveness, or was his confession merely a desperate attempt to salvage the remnants of control he still clung to? His invitation for unity was met with distrust, a sentiment that had been nurtured by years of manipulation and broken promises. Phyllis and Sharon, united in their fury, knew that Nick's appearance and confession, if it ever happened, would be too little, too late. The path to redemption was obscured by the darkness of his transgressions, and the scars he had inflicted would serve as a constant reminder of the night their lives were irrevocably altered. In this chilling confrontation, the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred. Nick's desire for unity, while perhaps rooted in a genuine need to regain control, only deepened the wounds that his actions had inflicted. The bitter irony was that the very act of exposing him had not brought the clarity or resolution that anyone had hoped for. Instead, it had laid bare the complexity of the relationships forged in captivity, relationships built on mistrust, manipulation, and a shared longing for freedom that seemed ever so elusive. As the night stretched on and the shadows deepened, the promise of escape became a distant dream, replaced by the harsh reality of the present. Phyllis and Sharon, each wrestling with their inner demons, were left to ponder the future. Could they ever find solace in a world that had been so cruelly marred by betrayal? And for Nick, the question remained, was there any hope of forgiveness after orchestrating such a catastrophic scheme, or was he destined to remain a pariah, forever haunted by the echoes of his own mistakes? In the midst of this chaos, the only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal, the exposed identity, and the shattered illusions had irreversibly transformed the lives of all involved. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the only path forward lay through the tangled remnants of trust that had long been eroded by deception. Whether or not Nick would step forward to accept responsibility, or whether his plea for unity was nothing more than the desperate cry of a man facing his own downfall, remained to be seen. What was clear, however, was that the repercussions of that fateful moment would resonate far beyond the confines of their prison, a haunting reminder that in the realm of human emotions, forgiveness is as fragile as it is elusive, and the scars of betrayal are never truly erased. The night closed in around them, a silent witness to the unfolding drama, a drama that was as much about the human capacity for cruelty as it was about the desperate yearning for redemption. In this dark chapter of their lives, every whispered word, every tear, and every spark of anger was a testament to the indomitable will to survive, even when freedom seemed like nothing more than an unreachable mirage. The heavy wooden door creaked open, slicing through the stifling silence of the room. All eyes turned as Nick stepped inside, his presence charged with the tension of the moment. For weeks, he had meticulously orchestrated every detail of this macabre game, believing that his calculated actions were for the greater good of everyone involved. Now, as he surveyed the room, a startling sight caught his attention. Sharon and Phyllis stood side by side, their expressions softening, the hardened lines of hatred slowly melting into something resembling understanding. In the flickering glow of a single overhead light, the two women appeared to have reached a fragile reconciliation. Years of torment, mistrust, and pain had been, if only momentarily, set aside. The shared suffering had forged an unexpected bond between them, a bond that now whispered of the possibility of peace. They no longer glared at each other with mutual disdain, instead, their eyes mirrored a quiet, cautious hope. Yet, as the calm settled, an undercurrent of fury still pulsed beneath the surface, directed at the man who had set all these tragic events into motion. Nick's heart pounded as he slowly advanced, every step laden with both determination and dread. He knew that his actions, his twisted attempt to force unity, had come at a steep price. His rationale was clear: by uniting Sharon and Phyllis, he believed they could overcome the darkness that had long overshadowed them. But the reality was far more complex. His calculated moves had endangered their lives, and for that, forgiveness seemed an impossible luxury. The risk of losing them entirely, or worse, causing their deaths, was a burden that now loomed large over him. Phyllis's eyes, once filled with a resigned acceptance of the endless cycle of betrayal, now burned with unfiltered anger. In a heartbeat, her hand flexed as if ready to strike, every muscle taut with the desire to lash out at the architect of her torment. "Nick," she roared, her voice echoing off the bare walls. "How dare you play with our lives like this? You think you can justify putting us in mortal danger, all for some twisted notion of our good?" The venom in her tone was unmistakable, a manifestation of the deep-seated betrayal that had festered within her for far too long. Before Nick could respond, Sharon's steady, calming presence intervened. She placed a hand on Phyllis's arm, a silent plea for restraint. "Phyllis, please," Sharon urged, her voice soft yet resolute. "We must remain calm. Yes, we are angry, and yes, we will never forget what you have done. But turning on him now won't undo the past or ensure our future." Her words, though measured, carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, rash actions might lead to even graver consequences. The room became a crucible of conflicting emotions. Nick's eyes betrayed a tumult of regret and resolve as he continued, "I did what I thought was necessary. I wanted to bring you both together, to force you to see that unity was your only path out of this nightmare." His voice trembled, the admission punctuating the air with its raw honesty. "But I never imagined that my actions might drive a wedge so deep. If my intentions have brought you to the brink, then I must accept the consequences, even if that means my own downfall." The air was thick with tension as both Sharon and Phyllis digested his words. Their shared history of pain, betrayal, and loss had woven a complicated tapestry of emotions that now demanded a response. Phyllis's fury, still bubbling beneath the surface, was palpable, but Sharon's insistence on restraint began to temper the immediate impulse for violence. They both understood, on some level, that their captor's actions, however nefarious, had been driven by his own desperate need to mend what he perceived as irreparable fractures. Yet, that understanding did nothing to erase the scars inflicted on their hearts. Outside, the distant wail of sirens served as an ominous reminder that the world beyond this claustrophobic room was not asleep. The police had already launched an intense search, piecing together clues in a race against time to apprehend the man who had orchestrated this deadly game. The reality was clear. There was a high probability that Nick's carefully constructed facade would soon crumble entirely under the weight of legal consequences. The possibility of a prison cell, a future defined by remorse and regret, hung over him like a dark cloud. Sharon took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Nick's with a mixture of pity and resolve. "Nick, what you did, it may have been intended to help us, but the cost is too high," she said softly. "We will never be able to forgive you for endangering our lives. Even if you believed it was for our own good, the fact remains that you've torn our world apart." Her words carried the heavy truth that forgiveness might never come, a truth that cut deeper than any accusation. Phyllis, still simmering with anger, nodded in silent agreement, though her clenched fists and seething gaze betrayed the inner turmoil that her calm demeanor could not entirely conceal. The room was a battlefield of raw emotions, anger, regret, hope, and despair all vying for dominance. The women's reconciliation, however tentative, signaled that perhaps the bonds of shared suffering could eventually pave the way for healing. Yet the price of that healing was a bitter reminder of the betrayal that had set everything in motion. Nick's admission of error did little to ease the tension, and the silence that followed was filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that his actions had irrevocably altered their lives. The invitation for unity, though perhaps born out of a genuine desire to right wrongs, now lay bare the tragic cost of his meddling. The possibility of redemption, which he had clung to like a lifeline, was overshadowed by the certainty that his presence had endangered them all. As the sirens drew nearer, a final, grim note resonated in the charged atmosphere. The police were on their way, their impending arrival signaling not just the collapse of Nick's meticulously constructed control, but also the end of an era defined by deceit and manipulation. Sharon's eyes glistened with unshed tears, reflecting the complexity of her feelings, compassion mixed with anger, hope mingled with resignation. Phyllis's stance, though rigid with fury, began to soften ever so slightly as the gravity of their situation sank in. In that charged moment, the trio stood at the crossroads of their intertwined fates. Nick, aware of the impending consequences, looked upon the two women with a haunted expression. "I wanted to help you both," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I believed that if I could force you to see each other's pain, maybe you could find the strength to escape it together. But now, I fear I have only sown further chaos." His admission was a poignant confession, a man confronting the reality that his misguided crusade for unity might have cost more than he ever intended. The sirens grew louder, punctuating the silence with their relentless wail. The fragile moment of reconciliation between Sharon and Phyllis was now overshadowed by the inexorable approach of justice. Both women understood that the road to recovery would be long and fraught with difficulty, their shared bond a small light in the darkness of their recent past. Yet, as much as they were bound by the hope of rebuilding their lives, the wound inflicted by Nick's actions would remain a stubborn scar, a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. In the final moments before the authorities burst through the door, Phyllis's eyes blazed with a final, defiant spark. "We may find a way to heal," she said quietly, the tremor in her voice betraying the depths of her pain, "but we will never, ever forget what you did. We may come together, but forgiveness is a luxury we can't afford." Sharon, standing steadfastly by her side, nodded in solemn agreement, her expression resolute. Their unity was no longer about reconciling with the past, but about forging a path forward, one that honored their suffering and promised a future built on caution and hard-won wisdom. As the door flung open and the police stepped into the room, the echoes of that tumultuous night reverberated through the silence. Nick's fate was sealed, and with it, the end of an era marked by manipulation and dark intentions. The pursuit of unity had led him to a precipice from which there was no return, leaving behind a legacy of shattered trust and irrevocable loss. In that charged moment, the journey of healing and retribution began anew. For Sharon and Phyllis, the path forward would be paved with difficult choices and the relentless quest for justice. And for Nick, the consequences of his actions were now inescapable, a stark reminder that even the noblest intentions can lead to ruin when built upon a foundation of betrayal.